Allegra Stein, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We've had it in the diary for a little while, and for listeners, I'll say this because it'll probably come out in a few months. We're in the start of November, just in case we get any time sensitive stuff that we talk about. But like I first became aware of you when we were both doing the marketing seminar.
Yes.
Seth got his marketing seminar together. It was almost 2 years ago, which I was thinking when we just did this, which is amazing because I've still basically got on my list of things to do to use all the learning I got from the marketing seminar. Like
No
that's
kidding.
my part of my plan for 2021. True story.
Yeah.
But and then we reconnected again more recently, and it's really great to have you on the show, particularly because since the marketing seminar, it looks like you've really focused your work on coaching.
I have. Yeah. I when I was in the marketing seminar, I had a different project that I was working on in my coaching practice. And since then it's evolved as it always does. And now it's a different project that I'm focusing on. I actually thought about signing back up for the next round of the marketing seminar, but decided to defer and instead picked up This Is Marketing and kind of read through that and gleaned some nuggets and reminded myself of things. But yeah.
Yeah, I've got all my kind of notes from that course saved and there. And I, again, like you, like I pick up the book sometimes, usually actually when I'm kind of something from it comes up with a client and I want to kind of share that idea in a crisp way.
Yeah.
But Allegra, let's like rewind a little bit so that everyone can get to know you. And to start, when was the first time you came across the idea of coaching as we're talking about it now?
Well, so a little bit can I share just a little bit of backstory before
Please
the coaching moment?
Yeah, I love it.
So I had my, and I think it'll just give context for where our conversation goes, but my like educational background is in wildlife biology. My major was in wildlife fish and conservation biology. I went to UC Davis. So, and then in the years following undergrad, I was very involved in just like field work and ecology and being outdoors. I eventually ended up joining the Peace Corps to do projects and kind of environmental work. I lived in Bulgaria for a couple of years and worked with one of their nature parks. And then from that, I decided to become a teacher. I had taken a required class at college around education. It was just, I needed another class to graduate, and I was captivated by the art of teaching. I'd never thought about that before taking this class on education. So my brain was kind of primed for this. Someone floated, they're like, oh, if you're wondering what to do next, you should, think about joining Teach for America, which is another program that supports, much like Peace Corps, that supports individuals who want to pursue a craft. So I joined Teach for America. I moved to New York and I started teaching in the Bronx. And then I went on to teach for 3 more years at a high school outside of the city. And in the meantime, I met my now husband, and we had gotten married, and we're starting to, we were going to grow our family, and I got pregnant, and I was like, okay, I'm going to retire from teaching to focus on being a mom. And fast forward a couple years, I had my daughter, and then I had my son. And in that year after my son was born, I started to think about, well, so what am I going to do next professionally? What's my next path going to be? I thought about becoming a tutor. I knew I wasn't going to go back to teaching. I wasn't interested in kind of diving back into the administrative side of being an educator. I was like, maybe I'll be a tutor. So I got my first kind of taste of putting myself out there as a freelancer. I guess I had started an Etsy shop. I was pregnant. I was like, I'm going to sew little pouches with zippers, and people just would buy that. Like, it was kind of, looking at it now, it was kind of my first experience of working for myself. Anyway, one of my dear friends at the time, I was talking to her and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Instead of doing tutoring on a specific topic, I discovered academic coaching, which was more around the experience of being a student, less content focused, more organizational, how to succeed as a student depending on your learning style. Anyway, a friend said, you're a great person to talk to. You should become like a counselor, a therapist. I said, oh, that's a really interesting idea. So I started to look into programs around therapy and maybe becoming an MFT. But I had a very young child at the time, and there were no programs locally. It was just difficult for me for various reasons to like leave the house at scheduled times for various classes. So I was like, I don't think the time is right for me to go back to school and get a degree. But along the way, I learned about coaching. And I was like, what is this?
Do you remember where you first came across it, or like what that introduction was?
No, it may have been, maybe I was Googling through, therapist, counseling. Maybe I saw the word coaching. I was like, oh, what is this? I think maybe one of my first introductions was Martha Beck. So I was reading some Martha Beck books. And I was like, well, maybe I'll get my coaching certification through Martha Beck. Kind of reading about that, I discovered some other coaches. And then the mentor who I ended up working with is, her name is Brooke Castillo. She runs a program now called the Life Coach School. And one of her first things, she'd written a book called Self-Coaching 101. And I got my hands on that and was like, oh, it clicked that particular framework that she teaches. I got it. Like I read it and I got it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just want to understand that framework more. And so I ended up signing up for the Life Coach School coaching certification program. And it was a big deal because I was like, I up until then, I had been kind of changing careers, so to speak, kind of every couple of years. I had spent a couple years in wildlife biology, and then I was a couple years in the Peace Corps, and then I was a couple years in the Bronx, and then 3 years teaching high school, and now I was a couple years out from having kids, and I had this identity around changing. Like I shift, and I like doing different things, and adventure is one of my top values. And so I was a little nervous. I was like, oh man, I'm going to commit to this kind of course of study, and I'm investing in a certification. Does this mean I'm a coach forever? But what if I don't like it? Anyway, I spoke to a couple of people. I called some people who'd been through that particular certification, just some coaches. And I don't remember who it was. Maybe a woman named Tori. I'm not sure. But I remember talking to her and kind of telling her this story a little bit, like what I'd been doing. And she goes, oh, she's like, coaching is actually a perfect next step for you. She's like, what you are describing, like, she's like, I see how the dots all connect with what you've been doing and how you've been spending your time and working with people and your values. And she's like, this is feels like a very aligned step for you. And it was just what I needed to hear, I guess. I think I wanted to hear that, so I did. And so I signed up for that certification. It was very, Life Coach School now has become a big program, but back then it was.
Yeah. When is this roughly?
2012.
Right. Yeah.
February, March, spring of 2012. And it was just me and like 9 other people in my cohort. So there were 10 of us. It was very high touch. Brooke herself was our mentor. We met, it was telecalls, there was no Zoom. It was all just on the phone. We had our big workbook. And after, the course of the program, I forget exactly how long it was, but you completed it. And it was like, okay, here's your certification. You are certified through the Life Coach School as a coach. And then, like, I think every coach at that moment is like, okay, I was thinking about it this morning. It's like, you just wake up and, okay, I now have this thing. Now what?
Yeah.
Now what? Now what? Anyway, we could dive into that, but that's kind of how things got started.
Yeah. It's a great question. One of the other guests of the podcast, actually, a Costa Rican coach, is writing a book about coaching called yo soy coach y ahora qué. So it's like the same thing. It's like, what the hell do I do now? And it's
now?
a really important question. And so what did you do?
Well, so I can tell this kind of next part either through the lens of looking back or from where I was in that moment. I'll just start from where I was in that moment. So in that moment, I was like, what do I do now? And so of course I kind of went online and immediately heard about an online business building program called B School, which a lot of people have gone through. And thought, well, that's what I do. I mean, that's what I do next. I'm a coach now. So now I have to build a coaching practice. And the way to do that is to create an online business. Like, it's crazy to me. Like I have now thoughts about what that experience was, but that's where I was. It's like, okay, like if I build an online business, then I can be a coach. I just thought that was what I heard. That was the kind of, now as I see it, it's like, that's the fog bank that rolled in that moment for me. Like, oh, this is what I do. To be a coach, I need to now learn how to build an online business.
Yeah. And in your certification, there hadn't been any part of it or bit alongside it or anything that's supported people with what to do next?
I don't remember that. No. Not like it is now, not in that particular program. So that particular program now, it's still a thriving certification program, but there's a lot more business structure built around it if you want that. I think it's the same for a lot of other certification programs where you don't just learn the tool, but then you're told like, and here's how you build a coaching business. I think it's more common than not to find that addendum on it, which I kind of have a little bit of an issue with now because I think it tarnishes just the joy of having a new skill and just being like, great, you've got a new skill now. Let's just be about that. I shouldn't say tarnishes because I know it's an important question that a lot of new coaches ask is, okay, so what do I do with it now? And so I completely understand creating an arm of a certification program that says, well, here's what you do next. Here's how you build a business. But I find that those two things have gotten so intertwined that the message is now, if you want to be a coach, you have to build a business.
Interesting.
It's driving me crazy.
Yeah. So there's distinctions and you can choose which combination of those two things you want to do. And there's, I don't know how many, is there 3 combinations or 4 combinations? You could do both, you could do neither, you could do one or the other. And all of those would be valid choices. And I think it's the same over in the UK in terms of the certification programs. They do mostly now seem to have something alongside them, do different things and different levels with different people, and I think, we'll get to this later on, that clearly because of your business and my business, that doesn't mean that every coach is sorted forever, whatever they're offering. And there are some reasons for that in terms of the way that's still done, I think. But so tell me, like, what happened? You went on B School and you learned some stuff about how to do an online business, and then like what were the things then that you tried as you were asking yourself now what?
Step 1 was pick a niche.
Yeah. I was saying just before we jumped on, Allegra, and for listeners, that I crowdsourced some questions before I started this podcast a year and a bit ago. And the kind of most common question, which was just extraordinary to me, because a bunch of the people were people who did the same training as me and, were trained with I trained with like a little startup, essentially, which is now resting in the coaching world, according to the founders. And it's a shame about that, because they actually they were trying to solve in a kind of wholesome way this problem that we're talking about, and I think they mostly succeeded. But the kind of energy required to run a coach training organization was too much when they wanted to do other things. But anyway, the most common question I got was about what is their niche and how did they decide it, which is absolutely fascinating. And so that's what you did. So you picked a niche. I want to hear what the niche is, and then let's talk niches.
Well, what the niche was at the time Well, I had to pick a niche, and then you have to build a website, and then I had to get the email list set up, and then set up, like, that's what the training was.
And then and then get some people on the list somehow with some free thing.
Understandably, I get that. Like, okay, I see now. Well, I can talk about how I see it now, but that's what it was then. It was, I got into this space, like, oh, I want to coach. So in order to coach, I have to pick a niche. Okay. And then I got to have a website, and then I have to make sure I have branding and business cards and the email list and like all the things that I thought I needed to do and do well. And that if I just did well at those on the other side of all that, then I could coach. Okay. So I was like, all right, I got to pick a niche. So I was going to do relocation coaching, which I still have a very soft spot for. I actually own the URL, therelocationcoach.com, which I can't believe was available, but because at that time, I was defined by many experiences moving. I had relocated to Bulgaria by myself for 2 years. I had then moved back to LA and then relocated to New York by myself. So I had this life experience in relocation. I had a perspective on it. And I was like, I want to coach. I didn't see a lot of it. I think maybe that was happening too. I didn't see a lot of people talking about that journey that someone was on. So I was like, I'm going to coach around relocation. So in B school, one of the beautiful things that came out of B school were some relationships that I still have with people who I met in that program, who were also very new online business owners trying to find their way. And I think through the course of my explorations there, I'm trying to figure out, I try to remember how I got where my first paying client came from.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that I had been invited onto a podcast that a woman was starting. And I was talking about my perspective on relocation and some of my tools. I'm pretty sure I had a website set up by then and a contact page. And someone heard that podcast and reached out to me, who was thinking about leaving their job to move across the Atlantic to be with her partner and wanted some help talking through that. We are still very close today. She's like a treasured person in my story. And I'm pretty sure she was the first person to whom I said, great, it's 3 sessions for $99. I'm pretty convinced that was my first paying deal.
So the funny thing is, you actually kind of did create that first client by doing the online marketing stuff, right? You went on a podcast, did something that pushed someone to a website, which meant that they contacted you, which meant that they became a client. And there's
exactly. Yeah.
$99 in the bank.
And so that was like the first, and then I was just pretty much I just was like, well, maybe I can write an article for a publication about relocation. So there's some articles out there that I wrote. Someone reached out to interview me. I really try, and it's helpful for me with you to really, really slow down and connect the dots, because when I work with coaches now, I hear a lot of how do I attract people to me? As if we don't have agency in creating the moment of someone saying yes, right? As if there isn't something we did to make that happen. And the first person who paid me, I could just be like, I don't know where she came from, but she came out of it was like a resulting consequence of decisions I had made and things that I had chosen to do or not do. And I think that's really important, to just take ownership of when things are created in our coaching practice, to not be like, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
It's well, that's completely, let's find out, because it's not like you just sat there eating bonbons and money pinged in your PayPal and your phone rang. you did something. And so it's really cool to kind of really try and dig into those moments of decision making and action taking that that did lead in reflection to that moment of a person saying yes and deciding to pay you for your work.
Yeah, and we know some of those for you, for this person, because you built a website and you put it online. You said yes to the podcast, which may, I don't know, at the time may have been exciting, may have been like, what the hell's a podcast? It's 2012. I don't know what that is. It might have, but it might have been scary as well. And so it's like those acts of courage and those acts, like you say, like actually things that you did that opened that up. Did you remember who the second paying client was and where they came from? No. But how did the business go in that early phase?
I'm like, who was my second client? It might have been Lindsay. Lindsay may have been my second client. How did it go in that phase? It was so. Here's what I remember of it. I'm not a great record keeper, admittedly. I'm not a stellar. It is not an energizing skill for me. It is not it's not a natural strength of mine to remain like fastidious about records and organization. So I preface all of this with kind of, with that awareness. What I remember at the time is that I was creating clients, I'm sure. But I was very consumed with what I now call everything but coaching. I was very consumed with the marketing side of things. I was very consumed with how to build my website, with how to market, how to do things, Facebook ads and photos and branding. And I have a memory of just being like, man, I signed up to coach, but maybe 20% of my time is actually in conversation with people, and 80% of my time is like trying to figure out how to build a business. And I had signed up, I think, for a couple of other programs, thinking, oh, just maybe this business personal help, maybe that. And I remember thinking, I do have a distinct memory of standing in my bathroom one morning and just saying, I just want to coach. I think we all have those moments. It's like, I just want to be coaching. What's happening that I'm just sitting here? I just want to coach. So this was maybe in 2013. I don't know when Prosperous Coach came out. I think you probably hear this from a lot of coaches that reading Prosperous Coach flipped a switch for me, primarily because it showed me that there was a different way to approach the practice. There was a different way to approach the idea of like, how do I create a client? And I have since learned that my top strength, my driving strength is relator, which is a relationship strength. I really enjoy getting to know people one-on-one. I really like building relationships, and I'm very curious to know about people. And so I say that now because I understand why Prosperous Coach was so resonant with me, is because it was essentially, you can be coaching in a way that's based on building relationships with people very directly, essentially through conversations. And it just like blew my mind. I was like, oh, there's this other way to look at my work and how I connect with people. So I guess that started maybe that would be chapter 2. Yeah. Chapter 1 was, I'm brand new. What do I do? I'm going to sign up for this online business program. I'm going to try things. I'm going to pick a niche. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to charge, whatever it was, 3 for $99. I don't remember what evolved out of that. Maybe I then went to like an 8-week thought program, using my coaching materials. And then chapter 2 started when I read that book and was like.
And in chapter 1, though, it sounds like there were clients there. So what you were doing was working in some ways.
They were, but I also have to remember that I had very young children at the time. I had a baby, less than a year old, probably. I got certified in 2012. He was born in 2011. So he was under a year old when I started. And he wasn't going to be going off to any kind of like preschool or kindergarten for another couple of years. So I have to couch my story in that variable as well, that my life, I wasn't working on it full time. I was trying to fit in what I could within the bigger priority of my life then, which was raising my kid and keeping my, 2 kids. I mean, he was 1, she was 3. It was a busy time. So I was creating clients, but certainly not, again, I don't even remember the clear financial picture at the time, but I think there were people coming in who I would, they would reach out. Maybe they would hear me or read about things. Maybe I'd post, if I was doing relocation, they'd be like, I'm moving. Oh yeah. And then I met Kelsey stands out as someone who was another client from that time who was relocating. And, I think maybe at that point I think I tried raising my prices a little bit. And it was it 200 for a couple of sessions? Maybe it was 200 a month, 250 a month. Like I was playing and just trying to like fit, but then a majority of my time thinking about things that weren't related to coaching, just like this void of, I call it like the black hole of everything but coaching, as if I could just figure all that stuff out, then I don't know what I thought would happen. People would just start calling me and I would just spend all day just coaching and getting paid for it.
But what you said before is, and then I can coach. It's almost like, actually you feel like if I don't have all this stuff in place, then there's no, like it doesn't work. Like I can't do it.
And it was a very loud narrative. And I think it's only gotten louder. That is, and we can talk about this later, but just even the label of being a coach is so weighted and distorted, and what coaching is, and it just stops people in their tracks. I'm seeing a lot of really smart stuff come out around like, don't call yourself a coach, like don't call it coaching, because something even about that now, I think, takes people out of what they're really doing, which is being of service to another person and giving that person space to just be themselves and see what happens. And then being like, but I have to tell people I'm a coach now. And how am I going to get coaching clients? And I've become a stickler for language in the coaching industry that I just find handcuffs people.
Yeah.
It's just handcuffing these new, vibrant, really amazing people who learned a new tool through their certification. And now it's just like, the narrative is so loud around what one has to do and what it looks like. And that's kind of what I'm very driven around that now, because I was in it.
Yeah.
Because I was in that for a very long time. And
I think that's one of the things that book, actually, The Prosperous Coach, one of the reasons it's been so successful is because it does for a lot of people what it sounds like it did for you, and it certainly did for me. It's like, there's another way. I can choose how I do this, and all that stuff that I think is speech marks true about coaching, whatever we mean by that. Actually, I could just look at that all from this different way. And for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people, that other way of looking is a lot preferable to where we start from.
Especially if you have a lot of relating strengths. And my driving strength is a relating strength.
And it's probably worth saying that it must be, I mean, you'll know this better than me, right? But it must be true that for most people who want to be coaches, a lot of people who want to be coaches will do that because they love having conversations with people. And a lot of people who love having conversations with people will have, if it's not relator, will have other strengths amongst their top few that are about people. And that's why they get into it. Not everyone, but a lot of people.
It's really fascinating. So without getting too far into the present moment, but I work with a lot of coaches now. And one of the first things we do is they find out their strengths. And then we really sit with, we're like, okay, what are these natural talents that you have? And how can that inform who you are as a coach and the clients you want to work with and how you want to evolve your practice? And it's really interesting to find and work with coaches who, let's say, lead with a lot of thinking strengths and playing with and trying to dismantle that there is some ideal strengths combination to be an effective coach. It's real, because I'll see a lot of comparisonitis. Will be like, oh man, well, they have all the good coaching strengths.
Well, well, I know that. So I know that Relator, I think, is one of them. I know that I saw on one of your videos that you talk about Clifton strengths and you use that. For the first time, so I did it when I was doing my coach training the first time. Just got the top 5, and then a couple of years ago, me and my friend Nicole were delivering a workshop on Strengths Finder or Clifton strengths to a team, and I thought I'd do the full whack, the full 34, right? And what was great was that empathy for me was down at like number 30, something like that. And it's like, you know, I can imagine if I did that at the start, I'd be like, shit, I'm gonna have to give this whole thing up. If I can't be empathic, then like, what is the point in doing this coaching thing? And of course, what I now know of, you know, and we can talk about textures of strengths and how they play out and how different things show up. But like, I can really imagine that if you're a new coach and you're seeing the strengths and then someone else has got whatever ones you think are the speech marks right ones for a coach to have. It's like, oh yeah, I totally get it.
Well, and that's why when I start working with a new coach, I'm so excited to do that exercise with them, because those strengths are showing up the thing about strengths, as I've discovered, is we do them naturally. Like the ones that are at the top, we don't even realize are strengths because they just come so naturally to us. We just don't even realize that they're there. And so when you do something like Gallup Strengths Finder or whatever, and you see it, you're right. Like there are some times where there's a moment of like, no, I don't want that to be it. I don't want that. Oh man, I wish I had all those relating strengths, then I'd be a good coach. Well, we can either accept it or not accept it. It's still going to be like the cream that rises to the top. And what if instead, and this is where I love playing and ideating, is like, what if instead of resisting that, we instead got really creative around how those actual strengths are your greatest asset as a coach, and that your dream clients want those gifts. And if they don't want them, they are not your dream client. I love that. Yeah. I just love holding that. Even if someone can't see it at first, just be like, yeah, you are a deep thinker, right? And that's an asset. There's someone out there who needs exactly what you're going to bring into that partnership. And why not maximize those things from the beginning? I could talk more about my insights around strengths. That comes a little bit later in the story, but it was incredibly liberating for me for other reasons in the coaching journey, because Prosperous Coach was like a big game changer for me, but it did not take away the reality that there are still skills to master even within that model. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle too for coaches, is the idea that creating a paying client is somehow like a small win. You know, I put that to my community the other day. I'm like, what would be a small win for you? And someone was like, creating my next paying client. And I said, oh, that's the win. Like, that's, as coaches who want to be self-employed, you know, freelancers, creating a paying client is actually like, that's the top of the mountain. That's the
right. If that's your small win, then like how do you keep yourself going, basically, is what I think then. Because it's like, if the only time I get to win is when I get a new paying client, like how do I feel the rest of the time?
That, and the idea that that's a small thing.
Yeah.
That isn't somehow, I like thinking about those stereogram pictures with lots of dots, you know, I don't know if it's stereogram, but like the dot pictures where when you're zooming out, you see like create paying client. But as you get closer and closer and closer, you realize that that moment is the result of a willingness to practice lots of little things that take time and nuance. And it was so interesting for me to see that in myself when someone said that was a small win. I'm like, and I love your perspective on it too. Like, well, if that's the win, then what about all the other things that there are to do? And
so let's go there now, just because it's too good a question. I've got to ask the question, right? People will be listening and want to know. tell us, like, in your view, from what you've seen of your own business and working with other coaches, what are the most important dots that make up create a paying client?
My gosh. I mean, I think I posed this to some people. I'm like, what is the very first thing to practice? And I have to give credit. I am seeing now, I know you interviewed Toku McCree.
Yeah.
Like, I have to
I was
credit
just thinking of him actually as you were thinking that.
of planting the seeds of like what I'm only now. And I've known Toku and I have talked a couple of times. I didn't do his dojo, but I've always admired his work and his perspective on it. And we had conversations. It's been a while, but I don't think I saw then what I see now about what he's talking about around like practice, around really zooming in on what exactly the finer points are and focusing on those things. And I believe that's what he does in his dojo. Like, he's been, and I'm seeing it's like, I listened to the interview you did with him, and a lot of it stuck with me. And even now that I'm working in support of coaches, things are starting to connect for me that I'm like, oh, I can see now. So when I think like, well, what is one of the very first things to practice? And in some cases, it's simply telling people what we do.
Yeah.
It sounds so, what do you mean? Just, there is some resistance out there.
Huge resistance for a lot of people.
On Tuesday, you get the email that you got your coach certification. On Wednesday morning, you wake up going, now what? And I would suggest, like, well, what if you told some people about that?
Yeah, it's a really good one.
What comes up for people, but what are they going to think? They're going to judge, right? And so that is a very tiny first step, and yet there is work there. Now, if someone was like, I have no problem telling people, great. What would be the very next thing? I think I move from telling people, I think the invitation is very close to the beginning of, is a very important dot, is how comfortable are you asking somebody if they would like to talk to you about anything? Just, would you like to talk, or would you like some help? Those two, I think would like some help maybe follows from the, would you like to talk, or can I tell you about this thing I learned? And this is where this whole idea of coaching and the word coach, I think, kind of throws people off. Because when you get a coaching certification, I kind of think that you're just given another tool. You're given a tool to help a person, like to help people. But before the certification, you also had tools. Before I was certified as a coach, I had the tool of a teacher, which I think I love that tool. I had the tool of coming up with good ideas. One of my top strengths happens to be ideation, which I wish I had known at the beginning, right? It's like, I can come up with ideas all the time. I love them, right? I'm an activator. I can get things started, right? I had these tools before I had the tool of getting my coaching certification, but there's something about that moment that I think blinds people to all the stuff that they were doing before that moment.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's part of this narrative of the industry of what coaching is, and that somehow on Wednesday morning when you have a certification, all you can say now is, I'm a coach. And it gets stuck in people's throats because you haven't. One of my favorite metaphors is like a baker decides they want to become a baker. They can cook. They cook great, but they're like, I want to become a baker. And they go to baking school and they get their certificate. They've learned some recipes. They wake up the next morning. Maybe they're not comfortable quite saying like, I'm a baker. They might just be like, well, I just finished baking school and I'm going to go bake some cookies and try and figure out what I'm doing. But there's this urgency and pressure, again, fueled by, I call it the coaching industrial complex, that something happens between the email that you got your certification and the next day where it's like, we've forgotten all our other gifts, that everything we do now is about hanging on this hook of like, I am a coach and that's all I can do. And man, I sure would love it if new coaches, maybe instead of, emailing their friends or people and saying, I'm a coach now, saying, I've learned a new tool.
Yeah, there was a super cool like invitation that you had in there or thing for people to use, which was from the baker analogy, which is I've just finished baking school and I'm here to practice baking.
That's
so you just change the word baking for coaching, and any coach who's listening can get into a load of coaching conversations off the back of that. You just need to say that to 10 people and away you go, right?
And if you're resistant to even the word I'm coaching, because you're worried, what are people going to think? Because, what do they think about all of that mess? It can be as simple as like, oh, I just learned a new tool I'm really excited about. Like, can I tell you about, like, it would be really helpful for me just to be able to describe it in my own words. Are you willing to like spend 20 minutes with me?
Yeah.
That is a practice. Do that 10 times and like, then you're going to be like, okay, yeah, now it's really now it's just rolling off the tongue of like this tool I've learned. And and there's like a zooming in, and I hear Steve Chandler in my head around the slowing down piece. Like, it's really interesting for me how all these things that I heard and learned along the way only now make sense in my 8th, 9th year of doing this work. And that too is another thing I'm trying to just hold and present, is there is a patience and a willingness to play and explore and try new things that I don't think is encouraged enough, because of this idea that it's somehow some linear like, just follow these 10 steps and you'll make 100K in 3 months. And it's like, oh.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is really something about that I think is, again, it's something that's good about those people you're mentioning, those teachers who talk about slowing down, who talk about long games, because there's this sense that we finish the thing and then it'll be easy, right? Coaching is not an easy business to run. It doesn't have to be hard in the way that we did it, but certainly, what success I've had, which is not enormous by any stretch, came at the cost of like a lot of courage, above all, a lot of doing stuff that I was fucking scared of. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that there's this, like, I was working with some coaches and I explained that one year when I think the first year I was enrolling for my group, I've run a group coaching program for coaches a few times. And the first year I was enrolling for that, there was 1 week where I sent out 40 written invitations to people to come to trial calls for it. Like, their kind of jaws dropped at this because they felt like it's like, yeah, I sat down and I did work. Because that's what it takes, or it's what it takes me. Like, there may be people out there for whom this is super easy, but for me, it's taken time and practice and learning and humility and failure.
So much. Well, and I think one of the other lessons that Prosperous Coach taught me, and again, credit to every coach and teacher who I've been connected to and learned from through that community, like, it's a vast tapestry, but like, I think there's a lot of safety in the online model that keeps us out of those moments, really. And it sounds a little bit simple, but like, of hearing someone say no to us, an actual human on the other side of an email.
That's another dot, right? In creator paying client is hearing some no's.
Yes, which, right, I think, but it's like really hearing no from an actual human. There's an avoidance of that to the nth degree, I see, of like, here's an example. I'll see a lot of new coaches saying, please tell me how to. So one of the common marketing models, and I have to be clear, I don't have any beef with online marketing business models or business strategy. Like, I think there's some very powerful stuff out there that works for certain people. Where I really have an issue is when it's presented as the proven system for everybody.
Yeah, but I think you're catching something important, right? Which is something that Seth Godin is good at, which is that it's important that the coaching people who do coaching don't swap obsession with that online marketing model for like total allergy to that online marketing model, because there are tools that can be super useful about all that stuff.
A bazillion percent. What I think I'm starting to see where my point of view has been shaping is I think the order is mixed up.
Yeah.
I am a student. I'm self-employed. I am a student of Seth Godin and Tad Hargrave and marketing principles. And I use digital tools to build my community and shine my light. And I think those things are, having an understanding of all those things are game changers. In the coaching industry in particular, I just believe that is presented far too early. And with this underlying message that to coach, you have to figure that stuff out. I would rather, so continuing the bakery metaphor, I think it'll help. A baker gets their certification and they walk out of their baking school, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. Okay, now what? I think what happens in the coaching model is all of a sudden, all these Ubers start pulling up, taxis. Hey, hop in, we're going to help you build a bakery. Let's go. Don't you want to build a bakery? Oh, yeah. Yes.
10 easy steps to build a bakery.
10 easy steps to build a bakery. Let's do it.
It'll make you 6 figures in 6 months.
Oh, okay. And so the baker gets it because part of that baker signed up for the baking school because they had visions of building a bakery. They didn't want to have a hobby. They wanted to become like a baker for career. Okay. They come out of baking school. They're taken into an office. All right. So what do you want the bakery to look like? Let's pick some colors. Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you want to serve in it? This is niche, right? What are you going to sell at your bakery? I don't know. Well, what I guess I could do cupcakes. I don't know. Okay, great. Cupcakes. What colors? What should we call it? Now make sure you get the branding photos. Now we got to market it because we're going to open the doors, right? And you're going to launch. And then when it opens, then you're going to be baking. Isn't that great? That is what happens to coaches all the time.
Yeah.
Innocently. And don't get me wrong, there are some coaches who thrive in that. But now I know why they thrive, because I have and we can talk about that, but like I have learned, and some people thrive with those for some people, that model is perfectly aligned to their strengths and their skills and their interests and their personality and their lifestyle. And that's what you see. You see the people who go into that and they are making 6 figures in a year, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, it's possible. But I like talking to the coach or the baker who walks out and is like, I think I'm going to walk down the corner to the supermarket and pick out a bunch of ingredients that I'm interested in and go home and just start baking. And I'm not going to build a bakery for which all of those tools in that boardroom are really helpful until I know exactly what I want to bake. Until I've done a lot of baking on my own and burned a lot of things and tried different ingredients and tasted it and had people test it. Until I really know who I am as a baker, what kind of cookie I like, what are my recipes that I can just be like, yeah, this is mine. Then that's when all of the marketing work, all of the business building stuff, I think it's just so much more, I don't know, just feels so much more fun because you can pick the tools that actually are aligned now with what you want to do because you've done it, not the reverse. I hope that's making sense.
It's absolutely making sense. Yeah. It's absolutely is. And I guess it sounds like, it's that key bit, and like, for some people that stuff is great because their strengths line up with it. It sounds like what you found in the Prosperous Coach was a different approach that aligned more with your strengths. So I want to get to what you're doing now because we're kind of edging around it and talking about it. But first, I just wonder what happened in those years with your practice. Who did you work with after? In chapter 2, absolutely.
So after reading Prosperous Coach, I hired a coach who who was working within that model. John Morgan, I worked with. He was great. I was in one of his group programs. I started to just like be in that community because I just wanted to be around it. And I financially kind of got in this place. So this is where this other change happened, where I was like, okay, I've been doing $250 a month. I'm like, but man, there are coaches out there who were who are making thousands of dollars for each client. And like, what would that be like to do? And can I, one of their big is like, it shifted to, for me, that it's not about my coaching. It's about the journey that the client wants to go on. There's that whole, talk about a very important part of the learning journey of a coach. It's having conversations with people, what a discovery call is, that shift from like, it's not about my coaching, it's about what the journey they want to go on. Toku described it as like, it's an empty container. I love that, where he was like, yeah, it's just an empty box. Let's see what we can put in it. I'm like, that's such an apt metaphor for, but getting that and practicing that, I think that's such a dynamic, fun, creative time of coaching, is really figuring out what it is that we do. Not what we think coaches do, but what we do. Yeah. And you just can't know it till you're in it. It's like, you can't know how to bake a souffle until you've baked a lot of souffles. And then you're like, oh, this is what a souffle is. And that's, I think, where the craft comes in. The craft, and I describe it as the art of coaching, the craft of it. And it cannot be rushed. It can't. And I almost feel nervous when I say that sometimes, because I think a lot of coaches are looking for, understandably, everybody has different personal circumstances. I don't pretend to know what someone's financial situation is, their urgency around needing to replace an income or get like, and I just have this awareness of like, and it takes time. It's a craft. It's like every other art form. And yet somehow it's presented as like different than other art forms. Like that, yeah, you can figure out in 6 months. It's like a surgeon isn't out there performing surgery after 6 months. A surgeon doesn't get paid for their work until 10 years maybe after they decide to do it. An artist doesn't necessarily start making money until years of commitment and practice. And I think that's, again, credit to those who've been saying that for a long time. And I've known it and I've seen it, but sometimes you don't see it till you're looking backwards and you're like, oh, there's a reason why I'm in year 8. And some of this is just now becoming clear for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so I was in that land of like having deep conversations. I had shifted to 90-minute, 2-hour discovery calls. I was making bigger proposals. I was shifting to like, I'm going to work with 6 months. I was just in that. I was very committed. Then like, I only work with people for 6 months. But I was also kind of like, but I kind of want to do a Coach and Dine event. I kind of want to just like connect with a chef and find a place and host a dinner for $75. And I had started doing free workshops at a local cafe. Again, credit to my coach at the time, John Morgan, who was like, why don't you just start showing up every week and teaching a workshop? I was like, okay, push through some resistance there. And that alone, that experience transformed and continues to play out in how I share my work now. I love just doing free talks and free classes.
And that little insight that came from John, or that moment for you, like I just think that kind of thing's really interesting, because do you remember where that came from, and how it came out? Because I think
how it came out. So a little context, what it was a group coaching program. And so we would meet every week for a couple hours. I don't know if that's still how he structures it, but a couple hours, we'd each get hot seats. And I don't exactly remember what I was struggling with. Maybe I was just, because my teacher was starting to bust out. And this is a whole other vein we could go into, is like, well, if you're a coach, you can't teach. That message of like what good coaching is. And that, that, oh, I'm a coach now, I can't be a teacher. But I'm like, but I really love teaching. And I think it helps people when I do that. I don't know. Anyway, I can't remember exactly what was happening in that moment that I was being coached, other than maybe he put a challenge on the table. maybe I forget if it came from him or from me, but whatever was, the idea blossomed to go to this local cafe that I really liked and pick a date and a time and just lead a free class. Because I think what happened after reading Prosperous Coach is I completely abandoned the idea of a niche. I just dropped into like, I just love this craft. I just want to talk about the tools that I love. I wasn't passionate about a particular who. I was just really passionate about what I was doing. So I was like, okay, I'll go to this cafe. And I had to ask the owner, and I was a little scared of that. And I asked her, and she said, sure, that'd be great. It'll bring people here. They'll buy coffee and donuts or whatever. And yeah, I started to Wednesdays at 10, and they were at a cafe called Conscious Fork. And so I called my talks Conscious Talks.
Nice.
Because I name things very literally.
It's great. But that's also a play on the name of the place. Like that's
yeah.
2 reasons a good name.
Right. So I started doing Conscious Talks, and that whole experience continues to be a source of like what I try and teach others, because what I did, and this is something that I love to talk about, is I picked a date, Wednesday, a time, 10 a.m., and a place, Conscious Fork. And I told people I was going to be there. I didn't know what I was going to talk about every week. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an outline. But what that did was it committed me to figuring it out before Wednesday at 10 a.m. I think a lot of time, now again, this is a reflection of my strength. So I can't put this out like, this is what everybody does. It just happens to be perfect for me because I'm an ideator and an activator. So I can very easily be like, what can I talk about? Oh, I know what I'm going to talk about. And then I write out an outline, and then I'm sitting there talking about it.
Right, and you had the teaching experience. It's like, it makes complete sense that it would work for you. But I think there is something in here though about giving yourself the deadline and the pressure.
Yes.
That does serve a lot of people. It's not just you.
No, and so I hold that as a tool, as if someone's like, oh, yeah, I really want to do a free class. And this actually came up with a client. She's like, I really want to do this. She had this really cool idea for geo coaching. And I was like, that sounds awesome. She's like, I know I should just do it. But she talked about it for a long time. And finally I was like, you need a date, time, place. And now I've amended it. It's called date, time, place, and a yes. Now I was just doing it date, time, place. I was very comfortable with the possibility that no one might show up, that there might be a week that there would be no one there. That never happened. One week, one person showed up, and I was like, lucky you, you get a coaching session for an hour.
Right.
One time, 12 people showed up. And that remains like one of the defining projects, I call them projects now, that I undertook in my practice.
And sorry, just to check, the yes that you kind of give to clients
as
a challenge now, that's to like get the first yes.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Because if you're like, whoa, well, Jennifer's going to come, I guess I have to go.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to go whether or not someone shows up or not. But other people might be like, well, if no one's coming, then I don't have to do it. Right. Mm-hmm. If no one's coming, I don't have to do the Facebook Live. Right. So if you need that little extra like cherry on top of your commitment, invite someone, say, hey, I'm doing this free talk. Would you like to come? Both yes and no are perfect answers. And they're like, sure, I'll come. Then it's like, okay. I'm doing it. I have a free talk on this subject. I love free talks. I think free talks, workshops, conversations is just one of the best ways to be of service, to connect with new people. I created clients out of those talks because invariably someone would come and be like, oh, this is great. I need some help. And then that would evolve into a discovery call, which, where I would be practicing my discovery call stuff. And then I'd make proposals. And then they would invite a friend to the free talk. The nice thing about putting on complimentary stuff, it's very easy for your people to invite someone new to that. Right? I call it like the free museum. This is definitely a Seth Godin thing. It's like, have a really cool free museum, because if it's free, people have no problem inviting others. Like, oh, they're doing this free thing. it's so much nicer than being like, the only thing you have someone to invite something to is something they have to pay for.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was great. I would do those free talks, and I was creating clients and longer partnerships, and also doing these little ideas on the side. And I would do coach and hikes. I would just invite people to come hiking with me.
Yeah.
And realizing that that the ideas of the prosperous coach were very liberating, there was still a lot of practice to do. There was still a lot of practice to be done. Yeah, and I can share where that evolved to if you want, but I don't
yeah,
wanna...
like let's like so if that's chapter 2, which was really embrace the prosperous coach, let go of the relocation coach and the niche and just coach who was there, and get creative with help from people like John Morgan, and that amazing amazing way to connect with people. Beautiful. What happens next? What was chapter 3?
Okay, so chapter 3. Okay, so what I was doing was I was having these 2-hour discovery calls with the goal. I was very committed to, like, I'm only working with people for 6, like, that's how people can work with me now, is 6 months over time, like, and having these multiple discovery calls, 90 minutes, 2 hours. And then I was like, I don't know how much of that converted, not a lot. Like, I would be like, this is great, if hit or miss, every couple months I'd create a new client. I never felt like I had a full practice. I was like, someone's like, well, when is your practice full? I'm like, I don't know. It hasn't happened. I guess I'll know when it happens. And I had this idea of, because people would have these 2-hour discovery calls with me and walk away transformed, right? Because how can someone not, when they're given 2 hours of space to just talk and be themselves, right? And all the things. And I said, well, what if I turned that 2-hour conversation into an offer? What if that became like the step before the step? And my ideator turned on, and my activator, and I created an offer called the whiteboard session. And because I love using whiteboards, there's one over there. I was like, what if instead of only having a 6-month, $10,000 coaching partnership, whatever it was, it'd been 6,000, and I'd been playing with saying different numbers, right? What if, well, as that, I also had this smaller thing. And that's when I kind of started to feel a little more traction with things. So now I'm in year 6, maybe. And I was like, I'm going to do these whiteboard sessions, and they're going to be $750. And I'm going to do this and that. And that started to like catch, because all through this time, I also had people who just kind of stayed in my orbit. My email list is like a choppy ocean. It's like, sometimes I'd be like, I'm emailing now, and then I wouldn't email for months, and then I would always, but I had kind of these people who just kind of had been watching me, who'd been coming to my talks. So I could now kind of reach back out and say, hey, I've got this new cool thing. Anyway, so I thought whiteboard sessions were going to be the thing. And I was like, I got to pick a thing to just have a business around. It'll be whiteboard sessions. And then I started to notice that I would get really excited about an offer, and like it would start to work, and then I'd want to do something else. And I would wake up in the mornings and be like, I have a new idea. Shoot, I have a new idea. I didn't know at the time that ideation was a strength, by the way. I just knew that I would wake up at, like, whiteboard sessions would be kind of working and getting great feedback, and I was raising the prices. People, and then I'd be like, oh, I kind of want to change this up. And so anyway, there was more to that. I don't have to get into all those things, but I guess that brings me to chapter 4 was, I'm going to stop coaching. I mean, eventually it got to a point where I was like, I just can't figure this out. Even though it was kind of working, I was feeling stressed about it. And so I got to a point where I was like, I think I just need to get a job as a coach. I don't know if you've ever been there.
Yeah. Like, it happens to me every year or so.
Right.
I go like, I can't put up with this anymore. Sometimes I'm like, last year, it's the first time for a while, I was like, well, no, start of this year, I was like, maybe I just need to get a job not as a coach. In fact, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to coach, but I was like, I don't want to do the business anymore. because I was tired of feeling like I couldn't figure it out. That was another thing going on in my brain, that I still didn't feel like I'd figured it out. I use that phrase a lot because I think it's relatable, because people say that to me. They're like, why can't I figure it out? I've been working so hard. I'm trying so hard. I can't figure it out yet. And I was that. Something would be working and then I'd get tired of it and be like, oh, why can't I figure it out? Or things wouldn't sell and I'd get frustrated. Anyway, so I was like, I'm gonna get a job. And that was at the beginning of 2019. Yeah, it was at the beginning of 2019. I was like, I think I'm just going to get a job. I started to look for other coaches who were doing their own thing and trying to like help them. I was like, maybe I can just work for them because they've got it figured out. And it was a beautiful time. I met some amazing people. I had some just lovely conversations and partnerships. There were some moments where I'm like, this is going to be it. They're going to get their vision off the ground. And then I'm just going to like subcontract. That's the answer. Is just help them get their stuff started so that I don't have to think about this anymore. And they'll just call me and say, I've got a new client. Can you go do it? You know, I thought about getting a job in a coaching school and I was like, anyway, fast forward to summer of 2019. I had written my resume. I was ready to, try writing a resume after being a coach for 7 years. It's a fascinating experience. But again, check out Carrie Twigg. She's amazing at resume writing. And I was like, actually, I can do all this stuff. It was a confidence booster. And then on a conversation with her, I said, here's my resume. What do you think? She's like, you don't need a job. You need to learn UMAP. I was like, what's UMAP? Well, UMAP is this really cool tool. You should check it out. Read the book. I read the book. There was a UMAP certification. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to invest in this certification. It's going to be this is my kind of last hurrah. Maybe this is what I need. And that really marks the beginning of chapter 5, which I think I'm still in. So
let's get to that. But
that's
first,
where
what's just come into my mind, Allegra, because I think it's something that we don't talk about that much. And we talk about this in as much detail as you want. But I guess I'm curious, you said near the start, there was an interesting thing with your coaching business about you had the little children around, and that was a big part of what you were doing. And then you mentioned some numbers of like, you were playing with numbers and the prosperous coach approach. And it's like, it's probably worth saying to people who are listening that sounds like a crazy thing to do, but actually if you get in that space with those people, it is a scary thing to do, or at least it was for me sometimes, but it's a really interesting thing and important practice, right? You're talking about practices 100%. and it's like, try saying $10,000 or pounds to people. Just try it a couple of times. Like I've never worked with a client who's paid me that much, but the times when I've said £10,000 plus, they were cool times. They're very important times because the whole thing changes once you said that. And for me, it changes when they don't laugh in your face. They just go, do you know what? I think I might do this. I'm going to go and think about that. And, we could talk, Rich would coach me to say, I should have slowed that client right down at that point and said, no, you don't. But I didn't. I was too busy going, yes, until they obviously disappeared off the face of the earth a few days later. But Allegra, can you just...
That is such a good story right there. I hope you talk more about that because people don't get it. They don't get that where they're like, yes, they said yes. Yeah. And you want to talk about a practical thing when someone's like, what do you do when someone doesn't email you back? It's like, yeah, they didn't. There's but that's what I'm talking about. In that period of landscape, post-prosperous coach, kind of pre-whiteboard session, UMAP, pre-whiteboard session was an amazing, very rich period of learning. I think because what Prosperous Coach did was it brought me back into conversation with real people. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
Well, what I was going to ask is, over that period, like how successful was your coaching business and who were you working with? And you said you got some clients in every couple of months, and was that what you needed? Because I think one of the things we sometimes have, especially in that community, right? One of the things it has is a lot of people who make a lot of money, or at least seem to, and that's quite intimidating to be part of. And
Yes.
really important moment in my journey was realizing I didn't need to do that just because other people were, right? How much money do I actually need and want? And therefore, what shall I charge people? And how do I want to do that? And that's an interesting place. And so I guess I'm curious, how was the financial side of your business over that time? And, did it do what you needed? Or was there a sense, because you haven't really mentioned that, or was there a sense that what drove you to change was that it wasn't doing financially what you needed?
No, so I am in a position and have been able to, and I feel very lucky and privileged to have been in a position where my well-being and the well-being of my household was not dependent on me generating a particular level of income. So I was able to operate from a place that whatever I made was like was a very important contribution, but not what our livelihood depended on. So I was able to, create, there was some of that freedom in a technical sense. Like I wasn't pressured to like, man, if I don't make this, we can't pay this bill, but there was a very self-imposed pressure. And there was this self-imposed like, yeah, but I need to prove myself, which never came from anyone else, by the way. Like my partner never put that on me. I put it on myself. And I think that's where a lot of the I need to figure it out narrative came. Like if I just figured it out, then I think I did have this number in my head of like, then I would be making.
What was the number?
I don't know, $200,000, I think.
Yeah.
I think at one point I was like, I think I even have a note that might be hidden now under all my other stuff of like $250,000. And I think I thought I was connected to that number because for me to take over the financial responsibility of our part, of our life, it looked like that number in my brain. But there was no punishment if I didn't reach it. Does that make sense? And I talked to some people who are like, it's kind of nothing's bad's going to happen if I don't create a client this month. And I really want to acknowledge that that is not a position that everybody's in. I love turning to the lessons of Rich Litvin around this, though, that if that's the case, that puts a pressure and a tension on the craft and the art of coaching that if it, and he talks about money projects and sexy projects. And I love that distinction. And I can hear it now that especially when there's an urgency around money and an attachment to it, I can kind of be like, there isn't going to be as much freedom to explore and play and try and fail if there is this piece that is required in some, for someone's life to function in a way that's, supportive of them. So yeah, like I have to, I have to qualify kind of my journey as having that piece to it financially, where I had put on myself like this idea that I should be making more money every year. And it did. I mean, if I went and looked back, I don't know how much I made my first year, a few $1,000s, maybe 4,000, I don't know. And then I was starting to create clients, and maybe there were a few years where I made 30,000 or 40,000. I'm still kind of like, in-ish that space. I haven't broken a 6-figure mark, but I've also realized that I'm not very motivated by it.
No.
I'm not motivated by it.
Yeah.
And I see it now as a result and not there's something about releasing it that makes it easier to show up. It's very 3 principles, like, just let it all happen, and it will all happen the way it's supposed to happen, where the financial piece is a result of letting go and just having fun and trying things, and not, that's a hard one to pin down because it can feel very internal, that awareness. You can explain that to someone, they're like, oh, Anyway, so, and I've experimented and played with different, pricing of how I price things. I mean, I've had $10,000 partnerships. I've had, that was really my most kind of longest, most resonant, deepest partnerships. I felt like they were, were at that level. They were over a long period of time. I really, as a relator, I'm very invested in the people that I work with. And I felt like at that level is when I am just all in on them and what they are and what they're working on. And yeah, I'll never forget. I mean, I'll never forget, for those coaches who are listening, like the moment where I said a larger number. It's a crazy moment.
But I remember that when I first said £1,000, and the woman, I remember exactly who it was in this case, didn't laugh in my face at £1,000 for 4 months of work. And that was like, she didn't do it, but she didn't laugh. And I was like, whoa, something's different now, right? Yeah. It's cool.
It's a very fascinating moment. And that number is different for everybody. And that's something that I try and like teach now around pricing, is that there is that it's a feeling we're looking for and not a digit. I think there's a lot of pressure of like, okay, so when you start coaching, it should be $100 a session. But for some people, practicing saying, like, it's uncomfortable saying $5 a session.
Yeah, I was playing with a client last night and it was like, she just wants paying clients. It doesn't matter how. I asked her, how much do they need to pay you for it to count? She was like, £1. I was like, right, perfect. Let's make that happen, right?
I love it. You and I are very much the same in that regard, because I'm like, great, practice saying it's $1 a session. Just practice saying that. And I guarantee that after a few sessions, you're going to be like, this is worth more than $1 per pound. Okay, great. What do you want to say next? Well, maybe it's 10. Great. I talked about that, and that digit, that is different for everybody. And I think that's so important to talk about. This pressure to, I just got certified, so it's $100 a session now, right? But
and that other person over there is charging this or that or doing,
bonkers. It's crazy how that, and I say all of this from a position of having been in it. When I say it's bonkers, I'm like, oh, I've been through that bonkers land. And I guess what I'm trying to do now is share those lessons, particularly the stuff that I've learned through UMAP and the strength stuff, because that is stuff I could have known from the beginning that I think would have completely changed how I approached my work. And I think I would have maybe still gotten to the same point. It very well still could have taken the same time to get where I'm at now. I think it would have felt a heck of a lot better. I would have been a lot easier on myself. I would have had a greater understanding about how I like to work. And so that's what became my motivation when I saw it for myself. I was like, everybody needs to know this.
Yeah, and so bring us up to date then with, I've lost track of chapters. Chapter 5, I think.
I know, I'm in chapter 17. All right, we are in chapter 17.4.
You've discovered UMAP. It's there. You've got this sense. Oh, this is the thing. So that was about a year ago, I guess. We're in autumn 20. What's happened since then?
Well, it's kind of, UMAP, just so people know, is essentially just like a very well-designed self-assessment tool. It was designed by a woman named Kristen Sherry, who had been working in HR and in career development for many, many, many years. So she'd been administering all these, there's all these assessment tools you can take, particularly in the professional field or whatever, corporate field, assessments about strengths and this and that. And so she was administering all these things and they were ending up in all these different places. But through that experience, she said, she kind of identified 4 really important ones that helped a person understand how they like to work. And those were strengths, knowing your values, knowing your skills, your energizing skills and your burnout skills, and your interests, like your personality-based interests. And that if you know those 4 things, that is essentially your UMAP. Your UMAP is essentially just those 4 things presented all in one spot. that if you can find a job that is in alignment with your UMAP, you're just going to have a lot more fun. That the more closely you can align to it, the more easy and joyful and pleasant life and work will be. Mm. So I was like, that sounds like a great idea. It connected with a lot of things that I liked about working with people and breaking big things down into small parts. And I said, I'm going to get certified in that and just learn how to do it. And so part of that was a strengths, understanding strengths and values and skills. So I got certified in it. I had my own UMAP done. And then I started to do career coaching with people. And again, I just reached out. I'm like, I've learned this new thing. I ran it. I picked a price that felt good to me, and then I raised it, and then I raised it again kind of over time. And I ran it all through the fall with some amazing women doing some really cool stuff, and I loved it. And then in December, and I think I sent you this video, in December, I woke up one morning and I was like, I think every coach should have this. Because what happened was that I suddenly realized why I had not been a fit for all of these other business models that I had been trying to force myself into, particularly in that first couple of years of my practice when I was kind of indoctrinated with like, pick a niche, stick to the plan. I just always thought I was a bad fit for that I couldn't figure that messaging of like, shoot, I have a new idea and why can't I figure this out? Well, I know now why. And I wish I had known from the beginning that I'm an ideator and an activator. I'm always coming like the idea of me sticking to a plan for the next, forever, picking a niche for forever. I'm like, I don't know, I might have a new idea next month. I can get things started very easily, right? If I wake up tomorrow and I'm like, I want to go on a walk and listen to people. By tomorrow night, I'll have a web page up, listening walks. Let's go. And I'll be inviting people because I just have that energy. I also have adaptability in my top strengths. I'm very easygoing. I'm very just like, whatever. I'm going to try this. I'm kind of more of a wanderer than a stick to the plan for the next 5 years, do this stuff. I value creativity and curiosity and adventure. And I just don't think those are values of like the message that's very predominant early on in the coaching space. So I just was like, I want every coach to know this, because if I had known this stuff about myself 8 years ago, I think I just would have made different decisions about where I invested my time and where I invested my money and the judgment that I put on myself for not being able to, work within the model that was presented to me. It's because it wasn't the right fit for who I am. And that kind of started what evolved into this past year and the work I'm still doing now around helping coaches learn those things about themselves as early as possible and trusting that they have all these gifts coming into their work before they become a coach, right? That becoming a coach doesn't erase all of these other cool gifts that you've got.
Yeah.
Opening up the conversation like you and I are having about what coaching is.
Yeah, maybe that's the place to go now. I love that stuff you said earlier on about the label of being a coach and also the language in the coaching industry. And I've just noted that down because it's great to come back to that. And maybe now's the time to do that. Like, tell us more about that, about how the language of being a coach holds us back and how the language in the industry isn't, I guess, isn't as constructive or useful as it could be.
Yeah, I just see it in like a phrase as simple as, I need to get my coaching practice off the ground. That is a common phrase. I haven't gotten my coaching off the ground yet. I need to start my coaching practice. That's where I just love to pause. I'm like, what do we mean by that? What is a coaching practice? Like just that phrase alone. Like if you woke up tomorrow, common code, if you woke up tomorrow and you had a coaching practice, what would you see? I don't know. And all of a sudden, there's this awareness that we are binding ourselves to a vocabulary that has no meaning for us. Saying things like, and I'm guilty of this, of like, I need to get my message out into the world. And I'm like, that's a tall order. That's a very tall order. Like, get our message out into the, and I'll say that sometimes, like, release your, share your gifts with the world. And then I catch myself, I'm like, what am I really encouraging people to do here? Like, that is a massive, amorphous, infinite thing we're talking about that becomes so much more fun when we say, I would like to share this idea with that one person. And it just grounds it. It just takes the fear out of it somehow. I think niching is a huge one.
Yeah.
Niche is huge. It is caustic in many regards. Again, not for everybody. Some people hear niche from day one and they're like, I know exactly who and what. But my thoughts on niching, credit to Tad Hargrave, who's been talking about this work for a very long time, who has been one of my coaches, who's just really given me so much to think about. Niching is deeply multi-layered and complex. And, my experience of niche is like, when I learned niche, when I was studying environmental science, it's like the niche of a bird has nothing to do with the fish. The niche of a bird is of the bird. It's the nest they build. It's the materials they use. It's the food they eat. It's when they sleep. It's when they wake up. It's the sounds they make. It has nothing. A bird isn't thinking about what that snake is going to think about what it's doing. And yet somehow in coaching, the idea of niche is just like, well, who do you want to help? It's just out there. And so I'm really trying to break that apart. And I say things like, who you are is as much a part of your niche as who you want to help and how you work.
And so, I know that you have the program, right? The Niche Compass, or you have run that this year, at least a few times.
Yeah.
Like, how do you support? So, and it may be that this is useful through the listener here, right? Who has been indoctrinated, who's listening to this with the idea they have to have a niche.
Right.
Without telling everything that's in your program, of course, but like, where do they start? Like, what's the right, speech marks, right way to approach that problem that isn't define that you want to work with right-handed, bald people who
want to open a food truck.
Yeah, exactly.
I say retired volleyball players who want to open a food truck. That's nice. The example I tend to go to.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said at the indoctrination, I find when coaches end up joining my things, I find there's a period of kind of deprogramming that happens.
It's like they've come out of the matrix, been unplugged.
Right, exactly. That's exactly it. And I'm just like, we're going to look at things a different way. I know, but what about my Facebook ads? And I'm just like, I know, I get it, but
because that's really interesting. That's still really, you're really still encountering that Facebook ads thing.
Oh, sure.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. The people, by the time they get to me, I'm just aware of this now. I don't usually get asked that stuff. That's really, and that's just interesting that for me, I wasn't necessarily aware that stuff was still really pervasive. But
you know what? It depends on how far along the journey they are. Like when I think about myself, back in 2012 fall, joining B school, that was definitely, I was very much like, oh no, I have to do these things. I have to pick my branding colors. I got to do my branding colors. And like, I don't know if I would have been, that's the thing. I don't know if I would have been open to a different perspective on it because I was so convinced that that's the way. I think that's why I like reaching coaches almost. This woman posted in a Facebook group. She's like, I was just certified as a coach. Where do I start in building my business? I literally wanted to just like find her and just be like, it really forced me to think, what is the suggestions I have? The first one is, and this is where the Niche Compass started. So the Niche Compass was this a small group program that I started running in February with the UMAP as the heart of it. I was like, I want every coach to have their UMAP. So I created a small group program called the Niche Compass. The first half was pretty much just leading coaches through their UMAP. Because I was like, we need to kind of figure out who you are, because if you're at the center of your coaching, but you don't have language to describe it, then I want people to see what their gifts are separate from their work as a coach. separate from all of it. Just what are your gifts? What are your strengths? What are your values? What are your skills? Because I see now that if you don't know what those things are, you're kind of just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And if you're lucky, you end up on a path that happens to be aligned to how you work. You're just not aware that that's why it's working. But the reason why it oftentimes doesn't work is because you're like a square peg trying to fit in a round hole, but you're not aware that you're a square peg. You just think, why can't I fit into this round hole? It's like, let's figure out your shape first. All these cool things about how you like to work before you go out and invest $10,000 in like a business strategy that may or may not be a good fit for who you are, but let's do that first. From there, so I consider that's like the coach part. And then I like to ask, okay, so knowing these things about yourself, how do those inform your coaching? How do your values inform who your ideal clients are going to be? How do your strengths inform how you describe who you are as a coach? How do your interests and your personality inform what kind of experiences you want to create for your clients? I try and use the word experiences now instead of coaching offers, because I think experience is just so much more fun. Coach and Dine was an experience that brought together my love of coaching with a certain kind of person, with food. I was like, I'm just going to take all these things I love and put them together and invite people to do this experience with me. And that's what I've realized now as I look back on my coaching journey, that I just was really good at creating projects.
Well, it's like you've been talking about it the whole conversation, right? It's one of your strengths. You're talking about exactly what you're talking about guiding coaches through. It's how do I build my business and, or create the experience that I want to have doing the things that I love using my strengths. And it's like, it won't be exactly like what you've described for everyone. It'll be really different, but you are absolutely using the adventurer and the creator and all those things.
That's right. I mean, one of the things that I say, one of the things I say is who you are is as much a part of your niche as who you want to help and how you do your work. Another thing I say is there is no one right way, but there is a right way for you. And that is just a tenet that I hold very dearly, even in my work now, where it's like, I work with lots of coaches and I don't pretend to have any answer about what the right fit is for any one of those people. The one thing that I do hold to right now is like, we're going to start with your UMAP, because you need to see, if you don't see who you are, you cannot advocate for it as you build your work. You can't have a greater chance of knowing what business model might be a good fit. I just didn't see those things about myself. And at any time now, someone's like, where do I begin? I want to be like, you need to uncover, whether with me, whether in a UMAP, spend some time getting really clear on what you are already good at, on what your strengths are, on what your values are, what interests you, what lights you up, what do you love to do, what is your lifestyle? I mean, it's a very simple example, but it's like, if you sign up, if you're a night owl and you sign up for a coaching program that says, all right, now you need to have your sessions at 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. in order to be successful. You're just going, okay, I guess I got to start waking up. But why not create a coach at midnight program? How fun would that be? That's the kind of stuff that lights me up, is when someone's like, well, you know what? I'll never forget working with a coach who has a lot of influencing strengths, lots of influencing strengths. Her favorite coaching sessions were spontaneous. They were not scheduled because her lifestyle didn't have a firm schedule to it. The last thing she wanted to do was meet up with the same person every Wednesday at 2. She's like, I don't know where I'm going to be next Wednesday. Spontaneous, and they lasted about 15 minutes where they would call her and she would, as an influencer, you can work through people. You can motivate them. You can get someone in action quickly. She's like, man, after 15 minutes, that person was unstuck and ready to go do their thing. And that's great. Bye. But she had been told that that's not how you do it. She had been told, no, to be a coach, you have to have sessions every week for 60 minutes, in front of the computer.
I think like victim creator is a good distinction here, because like there's a sense that what happens is coaches become a victim of their training sometimes,
Yeah.
but also of the like you said, that I have to do the Facebook ads thing. But there's also this thing which is like, then coaches sometimes discover something like the prosperous coach, and then they become like, and to a certain extent, this is where I got to, like, you become a victim of that approach too. It's just happening to you. That's the only way to do it. And what you're talking about here, and of course you're talking about it because you've got that amazing creative streak, is, well, we can just create this.
Yeah.
Like it's one of the absolute privileges of working in this industry, that you can just make stuff up.
It's really, you know, I love that.
Yeah.
And sometimes this voice comes in, I'm like, no, there is a right way to coach. And complete respect to the founders of this field and to the years of study. That tool I have a reverence for, and I study it and I read it, and I have a library of books around the art of coaching. That never stops. It's the container within which we bring that, and it's the allowing that we can be a part of that relationship with a person. That's the part that I really am trying to champion and celebrate. That coaching exists in a moment between two people. And I understand the approach that as coaches, we should empty ourselves, right? I think I've heard that, right? Come in empty. And I guess we could talk about that. I'd be curious your thoughts. Like, but I think I'm more like, come in with who you are. Like, yeah. I understand the idea of being empty, of being neutral, of it being client driven, of that I don't have the answers, you have the answers. I have a deep respect for that. And I also know, and that as long as I am holding that my coaching partnership is about the growth of the person across from me, it's not about my agenda, it's about them, that it's okay for my ideator to show up in service of them and to say, let's brainstorm. I might have an idea that actually triggers your idea. And I qualify this all the time. I'll say, I'm going to put something on the table. You do not have to pick it up. I reinforce that all the time because I don't ever want to drift into, I've got the answer, right? That's definitely, but sometimes I'll say something, I'll let one of my strengths shine, my ideator come through with something and put it on the table, and that'll change everything. Not because it came from me, but because it was in them already. They just needed to see that little moment. Kind of like John Morgan was like, why don't you just go talk in this class? And I was like, yeah, I am going to do that.
Who's to say where it came from anyway, right? Who's to say that it would have come to you by yourself if you'd just been reading a page, right, of what this person was saying? Who's to say the idea didn't show up in you at that moment because of the conversation and them and yeah. So
I think as a practitioner, that has been lately an idea that I've been mulling is, I like to say I'm kind of championing this approach to coaching of be you in your work, that the more you are, the greater service you're going to be to the person across the table from you, because the work happens in partnership with you. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes your greatest role is to simply be silent for 45 minutes and not say anything. And that's part of my practice, is recognizing when my natural ability to come out with like ideas or activating things is not what the client needs. They need me to just shut up for 30 minutes and just give them the space to just talk, to be the lamppost. And that's what I love, the next thing that I'm kind of playing with and developing is like all the different hats that a coach can wear. I think of them too as like sails on the ship. And we don't have to have them all up. I don't have to be an ideator all the time, but I also don't want to pretend that I don't have that sail that I could unfurl if it would get our boat a little bit closer to where you want to go. And I just think it's cool to know that going into a discovery call with somebody, to be able to say, when they're like, so what kind of coach are you? I can say, well, I bring this and I do this. I'm very adaptable and I can share ideas, but I can also hold space. And, you know, I'm coaching you, not your project. Like all this language that I now have that I don't think I had before I saw it for myself. And so I'm trying to give new coaches that language as early as possible, while also recognizing that there's a lot they're going to have to learn just by doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about, so here's a thing that's been in my mind a couple of times during this conversation. So I think this is an idea that essentially comes from adult psychological development. And I don't know if you know anything about that, but essentially there's, I think this comes from Robert Keegan. He's a guy at Harvard or somewhere, a developmental psychologist, that two of the levels of psychological development that humans go through. One is when we're really concerned essentially with how to be a good whatever, a good citizen. And then at some point, the level of complexity of the world is too great for that, because how do you be a good mum and a good worker and a good person in the world, and all these kind of different roles? And then actually what we have to do is define good for ourselves, not according to the rules of what society says a mum or a dad or a worker or a boss should do, but in terms of the stuff that you're talking about. And actually it may be, this is interesting. You know, I don't think this is true. I was going to say it may be that when those first training programs or that first story about coaching was designed, that the world was simpler. I think it was simpler, but I think we were already out of date then. And what it sounds like you're doing is, look, when coaches get out into the world, one size is not going to fit all for how they grow their businesses for one coach across their career, let alone for 30 coaches going through a thing at once. And the only thing we can do at that point is really know ourselves, and then, because that will be how we can respond skillfully to the different challenges that come up as you say, we practice and try things out across years of our work.
Yeah. And I think that's why when I created the niching compass, at the center of the compass is you. I mean, I had this video where I drew it out on my whiteboard. I'm like, okay, here's all the things you're going to be told you need to know for your coaching. At the bottom is what you do. This is your modality. You know, over here is who you help. They're going to call this your niche. Okay. Over here is how you work. This is the experience you create. Are you going to do, you know, what's the container? And then there's your why, which is going to change as your life goes on, because my why now is to serve coaches. My why in 2012 was to serve people moving. Who knows what my why is going to be in a few years? Might change. That's part of the.
It sounds like, Allegra, it probably will. Like, I wanted to ask this because like it sounds like you said before coaching, you'd been kind of doing a 2-year, 3-year cycle. It sounds like during coaching, you know, that person, Tori, or whoever it was who you had that conversation with, was right. To a certain extent, you've been 2-year, 3-year, 2-year switches, right? Chapters.
I know, but I've learned but I think what I'm seeing now is that that's not a problem, and that I thought it was a problem. I thought it was a problem that I had new ideas, and I'm also a maximizer. Maximizers,
me too.
They kind of never finish. Are you a maximizer?
Yeah.
They never finish. It's always kind of like, okay, I'm done, and then it's like, well, now what are we gonna do? And that shows up in my clients. I mean, it's great. You know what my number 34 is?
Go on.
Achiever.
Is it? Interesting.
Finding that out was a great day.
So for people who are listening who don't know, so Achiever used to be, it was the first time I did StrengthsFinder was in my top 5, and then it dropped down to thankfully for me, I think for my well-being and livelihood, I'm glad to see it disappear from that top 5 the second time I did it. It was still top 10, but for people who don't know Clifton Strengths, I mean, for people who don't know it, I really recommend it. It's pretty much the only.
It's fun.
It's pretty much the only test that I send to people ever. Certainly in my private business, unless there's, you know, a company I'm working with who uses something different. It's really useful and cool in a bunch of ways. Me and my wife, after we'd organized our wedding and fought like hell about it, we had a StrengthsFinder based insight which showed us why we were doing that, right? Which is that I have maximizer slap bang at the top. So when we're doing seating plan, I want to like sit down and like work out who's sitting, and it's joyful for me to go, Greg can become friends with Fiona. This is going to be amazing. But Emma's like, can we just get on with this? What is wrong with you, you imbecile? Because it's way down the list on her. Anyway,
I love it. I find it so. My husband just took the test, and I'm like, oh, I'm more into the results than he is. But I'm like, yes, exactly. But here's the thing about it, and I keep talking about UMAP is an assessment that I use. Every coach who comes into my membership now, that's where they start. And then the Niching Compass is now a course in the membership, because it's all kind of like layering on top of it. It's like it started with UMAP, and then it was the Niching Compass, and now it's Misfit To Maverick. And people can go out and take the assessment. Some of your listeners are probably like, what's this Strength Finder thing? And they're going to go take the test. Maybe they'll look up UMAP, and that's great. It is like every other tool book out there. You can take that test and read your results and set that on the side of your table and never think about it again. Or you can sit with it and use it and marinate in it. That's a word that I use. Or find a coach who will sit with you over a course of a period of time and really look at and consider what it means, these insights about who you are, because it's like any other assessment tool. And I think people take a lot of assessments as like, cool, oh, I got this result. And it's like dipping a piece of food in a marinade and then taking it out and wondering why the flavor didn't stick. It takes time and a willingness to just sit with, what if these are my, and the insight guide that comes with it, right? That's another thing that happens is people see their top 5 and they're like, oh, I'm a relator. But it's the beauty of it is not just in the name of the strength, it's in that insight guide that sometimes doesn't even say that word. And so I just want to put that out there as a little bit of a note that for anyone who's like, oh, I'm going to take it. Don't just take it and read it once. Like, print it and underline it and talk to someone about it and tell somebody else about it. Especially, I'm always fascinated when someone sees their results and they're like, oh, I don't like it. Oh, that's a great coaching moment.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually. That just gives me a chance to loop back to something I thought before, when we're first talking about strengths and strengths that we don't necessarily think are the right strengths for us, or we don't like our results. So when I redid mine, it was interesting. Input came up in my top 5. People don't know. So like the way so in Clifton Strengths, there are kind of 2 descriptions. There's a static description, and then there's a one based on me, exactly me input. But even in that one, it had this thing at the top, like input people, we like to collect things, right? And the example it gives is something like stamps or baseball cards. And I was like, well, what the hell does that have to do with coaching, and how useless is that? And I don't even like to collect things, really. Like, that's not what I'm like. And then suddenly I'm sitting there with a client and I'm sharing an idea that has just appeared in my mind. It's like, oh, right. I collect ideas and frameworks and insights. And what I like to do with them is collect them and then just like drop them in. And it sounds like a weird stamp collecting strength. But it's like all of those things, they, if we want them to be, those things can be part of how we do our work.
100%. Sometimes I'll work with coaches who have like a thinking trifecta of input, intellection, and oh shoot, I had it in my mind and it's just slipped out. Oh shoot, I was sitting here thinking that third one. But they essentially have a ton of thinking strengths in their top 5. And that's always an interesting moment. Like, it's really, I like opening up that creativity. I'm like, how is that a benefit to you and your work? And sometimes you don't see it until you have awareness of it. It's kind of like when you're told, and I come back to my baking metaphor with this. It's like when you are told that there is cinnamon in the cookie, and you're like, no, there's not. There's no cinnamon in this cookie. And then every time you eat the cookie after that, you start to notice the cinnamon. It's the same with strengths and their application for coaches, when they're just like, how is this even helpful for me that I'm whatever? And then this is what I mean by the marinating in it. A month down the line, 2 months down the line, I just saw where that just happened, because you can't see the label when you're inside the jar. And even when you're told what's on the label, you're like, no, that's not in there. I don't have input. What do you mean input? And then when you when you're just open to it, another metaphor I like is like, have you ever seen Contact with Jodie Foster?
No.
Okay, so it's about this young girl who's obsessed with space. And as an adult, she just goes to these satellite dishes in the middle of the desert, just waiting and listening for signs of life out in the universe and listening for noises. And, they program those satellite dishes to try and capture particular wavelengths and I'm just like, okay, she's programming. So I'll say to someone, I know you don't see it yet, but program it into your satellite dish and just hold it there. Just create space to notice when it shows up, because it's going to show up, and it always does. Weeks pass. Oh, I see now where that strength shows up. One last thing about strengths, just because I find it interesting. Sometimes our top strengths are things we were criticized for when we were younger. So there can be resistance to that too. Like someone has command as a top strength, and they'll say, I don't want to have command because I was always told I was too bossy and I can't be bossy. And that's a very deep learning moment where it's like, it's because you don't have to think about it. You just know how to lead people.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
I love it. That's so fun that we're both captivated by that tool.
Yeah, and I think in some ways for similar reasons, but maybe that's the kind of next question. So it's like this stuff, you take coaches through some of these things. Now that's this phase of your work, and maybe it'll be a long phase, maybe it'll be a 2, 3, 4 years, and then some other brilliant idea will come up. But why is it so important to you to be supporting coaches in particular with this in particular?
I think because when I had this idea that every coach should have their UMAP, it really was followed by, I wish I had known this. I think it's because I feel bad for how I talked to myself in some ways, even with success, even with creating clients. Like, it's not that from the outside, I haven't, if you want to measure, some years would be a little bit better than others, or is that there was always this like sense that I wasn't doing it right, that I wasn't able to figure it out. Even after Prosperous Coach, I still never felt like I figured it out. That model, it helped. It was a huge relief. It continues to inform how I encourage people today to just talk to people. Just be like, you need to build your website. So what? So you can talk to people? Let's just go talk to people. Like, I love always bringing it back to conversation. But there was just this thing that, like, the best illustration of it is when I would wake up in the morning and be like, shoot, I have a new idea. And I feel bad for those ideas now. I'm like, how sad that like a new idea popped into my brain and I was like, darn it. But now I'm like, oh no, that's exactly what I do. And I know that other coaches are out there doing that about their natural gifts. Oh, I don't want to, there's this like inner resistance or a kind of a guilt. I don't want to say a shame, although I hear that word sometimes, like, and it's captured by this, like, why can't I figure it out? I just paid $10,000 for this 5-step system. Why isn't it working? Or a kind of like, so the Niching Compass then became what is now the project I'm doing now, which is a membership space. So I adopted a completely different business model, part of the adventure. I went from doing very small, high touch, higher priced offerings to making it more accessible financially, but I'm still very committed to providing like a high value, high touch experience. It's a very grand experiment for me. And, it's, the name of it is Misfit to Maverick, because that was, I think, how I just always felt, is I had an idea of what coaching looked like, whether it was the online business model, the prosperous coach model. I need to be
or even
charging
like people in a suit. I don't know. Like what would
I don't know. Like I got to be in a suit. Because you, like you said, in the prosperous coach model, that can be, it's great, but people are making like, that is big stuff. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to be charging $25,000 is the next step for me. And this is what I need to be doing. And I just, even then I was like, I feel kind of misfitty. Something's not quite right. And I guess I'm trying now to reach those people. And some of them are very, very early in the journey. Some of them have been kind of pulled into that coaching industrial complex and are feeling like something's not right. It's not for everybody. The way I do my work, we're all not for everybody. Thank goodness for that. But I find that when I'm willing to share my perspective and point of view, it helps some people. And those people want to be around someone and have someone on their team who understands that, because I've been there. I've been on the journey. And so when you ask like what's different, it's like I'm like, I want to tell them what I wish I had known. And these are things, at least with the start of UMAP, I wish I had known these things about myself when I began. I never think it's too late. If I meet a coach who doesn't have it, I'm like, you should get this. With me, someone else, at the very least, get your strengths. I mean, it sounds like you totally get that too. Because when you know how you like to work and you accept how you like to work, when you know you're an ideator, you don't feel bad when you have a new idea in the morning. You're like, oh yeah, that's me coming out. You know, when you know you're adaptable, then you have patience for yourself when you kind of are just go with the flow. And you know, when you know achievers at the bottom, you don't feel so bad about not sticking to a business plan for 3 years.
Yeah, right. Just we didn't say that achiever is like stick it out to the end, do the exact thing. Yeah, I definitely have a bit of that, definitely. But
it's great, and you know, I like working with achievers but I know that now, because some achievers want another achiever on their team, right? They want someone who's going to be like, we're going to do it, get it done, get it done. I'm adaptable. I'm like, it's fine if you don't want to get it done. Okay. Some achievers want that. They want that foil. But what's so cool is that now that I know that about myself, I can speak it out loud, have a greater chance of finding the right people for me, feel more confident that I'm not the right fit for everybody. And man, that one alone in the beginning of coaching is like, but I can coach everybody.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but do you want to? Do you really want to? Let's really dig into it. That's another one of those language things. It's like figuring out the best fit. So anyway, that's kind of my inspiration, is looking for and supporting those coaches who feel like they want to do things in a different way, but they haven't been given permission, and saying, well, why not? Let's come over here and hang out with us, where we're trying to operate from our strengths and our gifts and our values and my lifestyle and your life, like all the things, and create really cool coaching experiences, which I didn't realize at the time, but I'm really good at doing, and get more playful and have more fun. And my hypothesis is that we're all going to get to the same point at the end of the day anyway. Why not have a better time along the way?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
You know, be more you. Life is just more fun that way.
Yeah, like that feels in some ways like a beautiful place to kind of draw the conversation to a close. I feel like we could have gone on maybe another time. We should go on for another couple of hours.
We should talk all the time.
But but for people who are curious, like they can find Misfit to Maverick. You know, we'll put links. Sorry, I should say we'll put links to that. We'll put links to other things we've spoken about in the show notes at thecoachesjourney.com. People should also check out your podcast. Like I was saying before we got on air, sometimes people email me about this podcast and they say, do you know, Robbie, can't you just make it a bit shorter? And I'm like, no, I make exactly what I like. And I like sprawling conversations about stuff which can go anywhere. But for those people who are listening to this, who have made it 2 hours into this call, sometimes Allegra's podcast is really short. So if you just want a little like espresso of coaching wisdom, definitely check that out.
Yeah, the podcast is good. That's a perfect example, by the way, of like about change and evolution. Is I've had that podcast for, I don't know how long. Maybe I tried recording my first one in 2015. The name of the podcast has changed. The way I create the podcast has changed. It's a good little kind of a benchmark of what evolution looks like. I mean, for a long time in my podcast, I was just talking about coaching tools that I liked. Then I would take a break, I would leave it, and then I would come back to it and like revive it and try something new. And every time I change the name. So now the name of the podcast is The Niching Compass. And I just am sharing my point of view on coaching. I'm just sharing ideas like this. I try and keep them super quick and simple. I have free classes. Like, I'm a big believer that like there's so much you can offer as a coach that has nothing to do with whether someone pays you or not. This podcast you do is a gift to people who may never hire you, but it's a beautiful thing. I call this the free museum. This is Seth Godin. We're going to circle back all the way. Yeah. Seth Godin says that what people pay us for is the souvenir of the free museum we put out into the world. I love it. It's been a mind bender for me. That's another idea I'm trying to teach really early, because new coaches are like the offer, getting paid. I'm like, there's so much more fun you can be doing with this new tool you've got, right? You could go give the baker, just go make cookies and give them out on the corner. But so I'm also trying to help coaches kind of zoom out from this stress of like creating clients. It's like, why not just enjoy this cool new thing you've got? But anyway, that free museum, that is something I'm talking about a lot. I'm teaching about it a lot. That's what you're doing here. This podcast you do as a gift to people, and I try and do that too. I have my podcast. I do free classes just because I like it. I like doing that. Because my hope is that it'll help one person. And if at the end of it, they want the souvenir, that's great. But it's absolutely fine if they just walk back out and go to the next free museum. So I like sharing that idea for any coach listening is what can you share that has nothing to do with whether, you create a client just because you want to help people. It's really lovely.
Yeah. And yeah, we know, like, if you do that, and especially if you do that without it being about trying to create a client, then that free museum is definitely a dot in the create client picture, isn't it?
It feels very counterintuitive.
Yeah. Trusting
that is a huge shift, because again, I think because from the beginning, it's like, if you just do these things, you will create a client. So everything becomes about creating the client. And I'm kind of in this space now, like, why don't you just do it just to do it? And by the way, like, that natural, that will lead to it. That's the whole idea, is like, you're still going to get to the same green light at the end of the highway. It's just a question of whether you're going to try and like zip through all the other cars and like just think about the light and all the things, or you're just going to enjoy the ride and pull off for a coffee. I guarantee 5 miles down the road, you will both still be ending up at the same green light. That person's just going to be really stressed and wondering why they're doing it. And you're just going to be like, I'm having a great time.
Yeah, and absolutely. And wouldn't it be great if everyone was just having a great time the whole time?
Having a good time, making coaching fun again. Maybe that's one of my new mottos.
Yeah, that can be the name of the next business or the next thing.
Oh, don't give me, no, I can't have it now.
Allegra, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation. Thanks so much for your time and for all the work you're doing, and for making like this conversation super fun. Like, that's been a part of it too.
I hope so. I feel like I did a lot of talking, but
yeah, well, that's what we're here to do. And so thanks very much, and maybe see you again at some point on the podcast in the future.
I would love that anytime.